All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're joining us from. And welcome to today's edition of the Security Compliance Corner. So, Security Compliance Corner is a monthly event that we usually have. First, for those that are joining us for the first time, to talk about different things around security. However, for today, we'll be looking at one of the solutions available to us in the Microsoft purview, and that solution is called Data Life Management, right? So that's what we'll be doing in today's discussion. Yeah, before I bring up the speaker, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Emmanuel Itoje. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer as well as a Microsoft certified educator. Currently, I'm a technical architect. I focus on M365, Copilot, AI, Microsoft Foundry, security. So I do everything that has to do with security in the Microsoft space, as well as I'm also the co-lead of the Microsoft Ninja Security User Group. I'm a big fan of Microsoft certifications. These are some of the certifications I have pertaining this discussion that we'll be having today. Now, our speaker today is one of our very good friend, one of our mentors in the community, Chidinma Ugwu. She's actually an experienced information security specialist with strong expertise in Microsoft security and compliance, talking about the Microsoft purview. If you're looking for a subject matter expert, she's actually a subject matter expert when it comes to the Microsoft purview. And she has guided organizations in safeguarding sensitive data by helping them to implement robust security policies and balancing protections with productivity. So she's so passionate about ensuring that organizations are protected while productivity is not affected. And she has passion for empowering people. So she combines technical excellence, problem-solving skills, as well as a customer-focused approach to deliver secure and practical as well as scalable solutions while inspiring others to grow in confidence and also achieve their professional goal. So it's an honor to have Chidinma today, and she'll be talking to us today on data lifecycle management. Chidinma, what are the things that our participants should actually expect today in this session?
Sorry, okay, for this section, we'll be looking at how we looking at data life cycle and how it comes in handy and how Microsoft helps organization manage their data from creation all to the way to deletion and why still staying compliant with business and regulatory requirements. So that's what we're looking at today.
Awesome. I can't wait to have the session. So I will hand over the session, the mic to you so that you can take us through the session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And if you are on the call, please, like I mentioned earlier, please introduce yourself. I will stop sharing my slides so you can share yours.
All right. Thank you. So thank you once again, and good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Like you said, my name is Chidinma Ugwu, and today we'll be talking about Microsoft Data Lifecycle Management. This is one of the key compliance and governance capabilities within Microsoft Purview. But before we dive into the technical details, I want us to think about something. Sorry, can you hear me? Because it seems like...
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, thank you very much. So every day organizations create and store huge amount of data, emails, Teams chats, documents, reports, and many other types of information. So the challenge is not just storing this data. The real challenge is knowing where what data should be kept and how long it should be kept and when it should be deleted. Keeping everything forever is not always a good idea because it increases storage costs because most of them use cloud spaces which actually they pay for these spaces, and also it creates security risk and can even cause compliance issue. So that is where data lifecycle management comes in, and that's what we are discussing today. So before we move forward, what is data lifecycle management? So when we talk about data lifecycle management, which also we call DLM, we're simply talking about managing data throughout its entire journey within an organization. I think of data like a document that gets created today. That document may be actively used for months or years. At some point, it may no longer be needed and eventually it may need to be deleted. Sorry, can you mute yourself? Thank you
And go
very
ahead.
much.
I'll make the question here.
So, at some point, it may no longer be needed and eventually it may need to be deleted. So data lifecycle management helps organizations manage that entire process. So that's what data lifecycle management is all about. It helps organizations and businesses manage that process of what happens to a file from the time of creation to the time it is deleted or to the time it leaves the organization. So it ensures that important information is retained far as long as it is needed, while unnecessary information is removed when it no longer has any business value. So this is important because organizations are often required to keep certain records for legal purpose, compliance, or regulatory reasons. So at the same time, they don't want to keep unnecessary data forever because that increases risk. So data lifecycle management helps us strike that balance between keeping what matters and removing what doesn't. So that's what data lifecycle management in general is what it's all about if you look at it that way. So that's what it's all about. So why is this important? So why data lifecycle management is important? So before we start looking at policies and label, I want us to like imagine your organization experiences a security breach tomorrow. The more unnecessary data you have stored, the more information an attacker could potentially access. So by properly managing and deleting outdated information, which is information that are no longer needed, you are reducing the amount of sensitive data that could be exposed. So another benefit is productivity. When users search for information and they should be able to they should be able to find current and relevant content, not outdated versions of documents from 10 years ago or 20 years ago, which is no longer in use. I'm not saying that files that are 10 years old or 20 years old are no longer needed, but there are ones that are no longer needed, but they are still residing in our cloud space or in our storage. So data lifecycle management reduces all manual work of you looking through those documents, searching for files 10 years ago to delete them manually. So what data lifecycle management does is to like automatically uh, delete or retain the ones that are needed and delete the ones that are not needed, which kind of reduces the workload of the admins in the organization. So instead of the admins having to manually decide what stays and what goes, just like DLM can, which is data lifecycle management, can automatically apply rules that retain or delete content based on your organization's requirements. And of course, it also helps reduce storage costs because you're not keeping unnecessary information forever. So this is not just a compliance feature, which is purview. It helps organization improve security, productivity, governance, and operational efficiency. So that's the importance of data lifecycle management. So moving forward, what are the licenses required before implementing data lifecycle management? Is also important to understand the licensing. So in general, Microsoft 365 E3 license provides access to more basic retention capabilities like creating the labels by yourself and applying them by yourself. But when it comes to the automation part of it, that's when the E5 license comes in, which is the advanced features like the when you're trying to apply retention, auto labeling on AI sites or AI, yes, sites, no, AI files or other sensitive SIT files, sensitive info types, automatically applying it to them. So when it has to do with the automation of the process, that's when E5 comes in. But when you're creating the label, more like the legacy part of as retention label, that's when you can use E3. So one thing I always recommend is checking Microsoft latest licensing documentation before, because licensing can change over time and certain features may require additional licensing depending on the workload you are trying to protect. So the important thing is to remember is that the licensing you have will determine which data lifecycle management features that are available to you. So that's it for for licensing. So what are the key components of data lifecycle management? So the components of data lifecycle management is simple. The retention policy, which we call org-wide, which covers the organization as a whole. Then the retention label, which is the granular control, which targets documents when you're trying to apply policy or label to a particular document or file. You're not trying to cover the workload. You're looking for you're targeting a particular file in a workload. You're not actually aiming for the whole workload. So that's the difference between the retention label. And the retention labels are used to create the retention policy. And yes, I used to. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to use the retention label, but you can create the retention policy to apply to the whole organization. But the retention label is more like a tag that is applied to a document. But it's not like sensitivity label, but this is just more like where you go to a store, you see a price tag on it. So the retention label is more like a tag on it. But this tag is saying how long a file can be retained, when this file can be deleted, or okay. Sometimes a retention label doesn't really mean that you are retaining the document or you are deleting it. It just is no. It can also act like a tag. It doesn't do anything on that document. So that's the component of data lifecycle. So now we know the components. What is retention policy? So retention policy is usually where most organizations begin their data lifecycle management journey. Retention policy is basically a rule that tells you what should happen to your content over time. For example, organization might decide that all employee emails should be retained for 7 years. So instead of relying on users to remember that requirement, we can create a retention policy and we enforce it automatically. Retention policies can do several things. They can retain content for a specific period of time. They can delete content after a retention period ends. And they can even delete content without retaining it. Yes, for example, we call that a retention policy based on event. For example, you are working on a project, and after that project, there is no need of retaining that. After that project, there's no need of retaining those documents. What you just create a retention policy that after this event, delete all content that has to do with this event. So that's what the retention retention label for deletion works on. So one of the things I like about retention policy is that they work in the background. Users can continue working normally. They can send emails, edit files, and collaborate in teams just like they always do. Meanwhile, the policy is quietly enforcing the retention requirements behind the scene. So retention policies can apply across multiple workloads. Sorry, I actually forgot to move the slide. So retention policies can actually apply across multiple workloads, including Exchange Online. I think these are all. Yeah, Exchange Online, which is Exchange Mailbox, SharePoint. We have SharePoint. We have OneDrive, Teams, Microsoft 365 groups. We have Copilot and AI apps. We have Skype for Business, Viva Engage. We also have Yammer and Enterprise AI apps. So rather than managing retention manually across different platforms, admins can centrally manage it through this Microsoft Purview. So so that's it for retention policy. And also before you go into retention policy, you need to check. You need to have the right permissions. There are certain permissions that are required before you can create a retention policy. So what are the permissions that are required? We have compliance administrator, we have security administrator, we have organization management, and we have global administrator. So one thing about when it comes to permission is that not every admin can automatically access the data lifecycle management feature. So that's why Microsoft uses this rule-based control to ensure that only authorizing people can make changes that affects the organizational data. So for example, a global administrator who has a, a, a higher role will have to give access to maybe the security team, because most times when the people that handles this feature are the security team, so can decide to give them only a compliance administrator role or security administrator role, so that they will not have access to make changes in other areas the of the organization except for the compliance part, which is the purview. So you can decide to assign the person compliance administrator role, which gives you the right to create retention label, create retention label or a retention policy. But I think currently now, just having a global administrator role does not give you the access to create retention policy. You still need to add compliance administrator role to your role for you to be able to create and manage these policies. So that's it for permissions. So what are retention labels? Retention labels are much more targeted. So instead of applying to the entire mailbox, it's just like what I explained earlier, that it targets a file, it targets an email. Instead of applying to the entire mailbox or SharePoint site, so a retention label can be applied directly to an individual document on an email. So sometimes when you go to your email, let's just say when you go to your email and there are some emails you want to keep longer than others, so you can apply retention label to keep those particular emails for a particular time, then other ones can delete for a particular time. So what retention label does is it targets the emails inside the mailbox, while the retention policy targets all the emails, covers all the emails in the mailbox. So let's say for example that you create a retention policy to keep emails for 7 years. That retention policy is covering the whole email in the mailbox. But you create a retention label until you apply it directly to the email that you want to, an email inside your mailbox. So if you apply it to only one email inside your mailbox, that's the only email that will be retained after a specific time. even when maybe even when the mailbox has been deleted because of that retention policy and retention label, that email will still be found in the environment. When that email is searched, when they search for the user and the emails in the under that user's name, those emails will still be found. You can still recover them, but you can recover them through e-discoveries. But that will be a later discussion in another session. So that's what retention label. So also I would like to compare them to, it's more like the same thing I was saying, putting a special tag on a document, and that tag tells exactly how that particular item can be handled. So moving forward, why retention label matters. So if retention policy already exists, why do we need retention label? So the reason is because it's flexible. Retention label provide the level of control that retention policy cannot always provide. Just like what I explained, uh, retention policy, it doesn't give you that access to make changes to different to make changes to different content in your email, but retention label gives you that access to make changes. For example, you've looked at this email and the content in that email is something you want to keep forever. You can apply a retention label to keep it forever. But if a retention policy and there are other documents you don't want to have in your email or you don't want to keep at all, or after some certain times you don't want them, so retention help label is very flexible, that you can apply it differently the way you want each particular email to be retained or to be deleted. But for retention policy, once you create one policy that applies to the whole mailbox, even if you want to delete a particular email inside that mailbox, it's not going to delete because there's a retention policy that says to keep it for 10 years or 5 years, but you want that email to be gone. So that's why retention label is flexible. So another important point is that in some situation, retention label can take priority over retention policies. Uh, so it's very useful when dealing with sensitive information or records that require special handling. So while retention policy gives us broad control, retention label gives us precision over it. So the supported workload for retention label is Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and N365 group. So like the retention policy, it covers many workload, but because this retention label, it has to do with files. So that's why it has to do with files. That's why the workload that it supports are workloads that has to do with files and yes, that has to do with files and documents, which is Exchange, Mailbox, SharePoint, OneDrive, and N365 group. So whether information lives in an email or a document library or a personal OneDrive account, retention label helps ensure that that content is managed appropriately. So that's what retention label is all about. So moving forward, we'll be going to best practices. So at this point, let's talk about some lessons learned and the best practices that has to do with data lifecycle management. So if you're implementing data lifecycle management for the first time, I'll recommend that you start simple. One mistake many organizations make is trying to create dozens of policies and labels immediately. They often create confusion and makes administration difficult. So I always advise, like, instead of creating many retention policy or retention label, we should just look at it at starting simple, which anyway, you can start by like speaking with your legal team or the compliance team on what is actually necessary that needs to be kept and what that needs to not be kept. So also using simple names so that it can be identified, or when the users who are meant to use it can also know what these retention labels are used for, and also uh, and also know which document needs to be kept for a long time, because I know that some users in the organization want to keep all the documents in their storage for a long time, but all those uh, all those documents takes a lot of space and cost the company uh, money. So we also look at the documents that needs to be kept. So that's why sometimes most organizations use or create that org-wide policy that says delete after 2 years, which means that if these files are more than 2 years, just wipe it out. Because another thing about retention policy, another way they create this policy, there's something we call retention label that is based on modification, which means that way, what that retention label does is to monitor which file that are being used, which means that if a file is not touched for over 2 years, it deletes it. So let's just say a user have a file in his document and has been working, and for the past 1 year he has not touched that document, but that document is still in use. If towards the end of 2 years the user accesses that document, the retention policy the retention label restarts again. So it will start counting another 2 years from that day the user modified that document. But if after 2 years the user does not modify the document, it deletes it from the storage, which is mostly what organization creates for, because that way you monitor, okay, files that are in use and files that are not in use. So that's one of the best practices, and the best, I think that's one of the best retention label policy to create, which is retention policy based on modification. So a file that are used will always be kept. The ones that are not in use, after a period of time, it wipes out uh, from the organization. So in summary, we've talked about both retention policies and retention label. So we'll be going to, for the demo. I'm going to take us to the practical part of it. The reason why I rushed this is because after saying all this, if I don't show you how these are created, then you will not really understand how it works. So we are going to go into the practical part of the data lifecycle management. So I'll be sharing my, sorry, I'll be moving to the compliance portal. Just give me 1 minute. Any questions so far? So any questions so far before we go into the practical part of it?
There are no questions, guys. If you do have questions, you can raise your hand. Maybe you want her to clarify something, call you to ask your question.
So this purview, this data lifecycle management solution. So here we have the overview, everything. Okay, what was your question?
If you have a question, raise your hand. Don't just jump and, All right. Busaya, you can go for it. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, please. I just want to clear something. What's good afternoon, please. What's the license you have must you have to that ED for the
Okay.
license must you have to which access
you can the license you can have for basic, like I said, for the manual control, you need E3 below. That is E1, E3. Yes, but if you want to, if you have to implement the automation, which is the auto labeling part of it, that's when you need the E5. So moving forward, the portal and this data lifecycle management. So like I said, we have retention label. So this is where you come to create your label. So there are two different I will not say different, other capabilities or inside this DLM, but we call it legacy, which before Microsoft brought in this retention label that covers for the whole organization. Before, retention label was in Exchange, and it was used for creating retention policies for emails for files and emails inside the Exchange. Before they now brought the one that covers for the whole organization. So, but also I'll take us on both the Exchange, which is the legacy, and the retention label that covers for the whole organization. So here, when you want to create a label that covers for the whole organization, there is no centered on one workload. This is where you come and create the label. So you give it a name. So it's very good to always use names that says what that tag is doing, so that when users want to make use of that tag, they will know what they're actually applying the tag for. Because sometimes, as a support engineer, I've run into a case where a file, the name says keep for 2 years, and while the settings was set for 7 years. So the customer was complaining that he has created a retention policy and applied it that documents should be deleted after 2 years, but he's still seeing documents that are supposed to delete after 2 years inside their organizations and users mailbox, that the policy is not working. So I just simply told him, let's check the settings, not just the name. So we found out that in the settings, they actually placed 10 years, but the name is saying 2 years. So sometimes there are mistakes like that. So when you're using a name, make sure that the name you are using matches the setting that you are creating in that retention label. So you can also add descriptions for users and for admin, but I'm not going to add it. So here we have different label settings. We have retain item for forever or for a specific period of time. We have enforce action after a specific period of time. So we also have the label that just label item. Like I explained before, there are some label that doesn't delete. It just classifies the document. It doesn't actually delete or retains an item. So there is also a setting like that. But here we are doing a retention setting, a label for a specific period of time. So when you've selected this, you click next. Then here, that's where we have retain item. You can choose the number of years you want to retain. If you can, here we have forever. You have custom. You use the custom to set the number of years. If you want to only retain the item for months, you can change this to 0. Then come here, increase the month. Okay, sorry, increase the day. This is for days. Then if it's 1 month, 8 days, that's how the item is going to be retained. But since we are doing 2 years, we are not going to put all this. So we are going to do this to 0, 0, and 2. So which is we are retaining it for 2 years. So now this is where I was talking about retention based on events. So there is retention when item when items were created. So what this means is that if you create this retention policy and you apply it to a mailbox now, so if an item is created, the retention policy start counting from the day that item is created. So which means that every item that is created inside the organization will start counting from the day the item was created. There is retention label for when item was last modified. So what it means, just like what I explained, that anytime if I create this retention label and this I use it to create a policy, which means that anytime a file gets modified, the retention starts from the beginning. Let's say a file has been sitting in the organization for 1 month, and when you check, which means that the remaining year is supposed to retain is 1 year 9 months. If I go and edit that document, it will refresh again and start counting again, and the 2 years start counting. So every time a file gets modified, even if the file has been in the even if the file has been in the organization for almost 2 years, to about the time it's supposed to like delete, if I go and modify that file, the policy retention policy restarts again. So that's what this retention item when last modified. So that's all. So we also have when items were labeled. So which means that if, for example, I created I created a file document, I've not labeled it, I've not applied the label to it, it will only start the day I apply the label on that document. But if I created the retention label to start when an item is created, and that item is created for like 2 years ago, and the retention label says delete after 2 years, if I apply this label on that item that was created 2 years ago, if the 2 years is elapsing tomorrow that file will be deleted. That's the difference between when items were labeled and when items were created. So which means that retention label kicks in immediately you apply the label on that document. But for retention label for when items were created, it means that even if the item was created before the time you created and applied the retention label, if the item has been created 3 months ago, it's what it will do, it will deduct that 3 months from the 2 years and to tell you that this file will be deleted in 3 months time, or in 6 months time, or in 1 year time. Because why? This label was created based on when item was created, and the item that was sitting in your mailbox says it was created 3 months ago or 5 months ago. So that's the difference between these two. So here we have product lifespan, event type. So we also have expiration of termination of contract. That's why I said these are event based. So most times you can use this expiration or termination of contract based on when you are working with a vendor or a contractor, or when you are working with somebody that is not a member of the organization, that you don't necessarily need to keep the person's document for a long time, or even also for legal purpose. For example, there is a current you have a case going on in court, and you want to keep some particular file for that period of time the case is going on, you can use this retention label to label documents that has to do with that case, so that after the case has been closed, the files that are related to that case will just be deleted. So also we have event type, employee activity. So these are different retention period based on you can actually use for creating your. So but we are going to create for when item was created. So also, if maybe you don't see the one that you're looking for, you can actually create a new event for your organization, for your retention label to work for your organization, the way you want it, that is specific to your organization. You can actually add that event type for yourself. So that's what this one is for. Then when I've clicked when items were created, then we do next. Then we have here what happens after the period. Delete items automatically, which means after the 2 years has elapsed, the items are going to be deleted. Then start a disposition review. What it means that after 2 years has elapsed, then you have to create, before you can use this disposition review, you have to create a disposition team. What this team means that people that are going to review the document to check if this document still needs to be retained after 2 years or if it needs to be deleted. So the disposition review will decide whether to delete or to keep to keep the file to run for another 2 years of that retention label. You can simply change it that okay, after this period of time, change the label. Then also you can run a run a power automate flow on it. Then this one you can deactivate the retention settings. Sometimes you can keep it for 2 years, then now decide after 2 years deactivate the retention label, which means untag the file or remove the mailbox from this policy. So that's what these options are for. Then, but we are doing delete automatically. Sorry, actually, let me use deactivate. Sorry, because I'll be testing it. I don't know, some files must have been more than 2 years, so that it doesn't just start processing it for deletion. So I'm going to use the deactivate after 2 years. So here we now create the label. So here, this is where you now publish it. Publish this label to N365 locations. So if you publish this label to N365 locations, this is where it's going to cover for Exchange and OneDrive, SharePoint, and public folders in your organization. Then you can choose to apply this label to a specific type of content, which is the SIT, the trainable classifiers document that in your organization, that is the sensitive content in your organization. Then you can also choose do nothing. So when you click on do nothing, what it simply means that we just simply created the retention label, but we did not publish it, which means that it's not working. But the label is sitting in. We created the label, but currently we've not published it. So if you don't publish a retention policy or label, it does not actually affect or reflect on the locations that you intended it for. So you must always ensure that you publish your labels after creating them. But we're not publishing the labels, so I'm going to click do nothing, then click done. So that's how to create a retention label. So if maybe after some time I want to okay, finally I want to publish this label, I can simply come here, check this box, and then click on publish label. So that's just what. Click on publish label, then it will get published. Then users can see the label to apply on their email, on their mailbox, or depending on how I want to publish it. If I want to publish it in general, so that's when I use the retention policy. So if I want to publish this in general, I'll simply come here, click on retention policies. So click on create new policy. So I don't know if we have any question. Okay, no question. So there are two ways to create retention policy. There is static and there is adaptive scope. So you can scope it to some groups and departments in your organization. But before you do that, you have to go and create adaptive scope before you can use this adaptive scope. Sorry, can you hear?
I have a question.
All right, you can ask.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. Thank you very much for this class. So very well explanatory. So I want to ask if are you hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. If for instance now, if you apply the retention policy, a document like an email, that, and the mail is suddenly deleted, and you remember that that mail, I couldn't have deleted that mail. There's something important in that mail. Is it possible that you can still get the mail back after the retention policy have deleted the mail out of the mailbox?
If the retention policy has deleted the mailbox after you've created it, the document sits in the organization for 30 days. So if you remember within that 30 days, you can still recover it. But
After the 30 days,
if after the 30 days, you can't recover it again. So that's how it works.
it has
Yes.
gone forever.
You have 30 years, yes, you have 30 days window to recover files that are deleted that you did not intentionally want to delete. You have 30 days window to recover them, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I understand.
You're welcome. So we have adaptive scope and static scope. So adaptive scope is when you want to create a retention policy that is scoped to departments, not all the, like now, if I use the static scope, I'll be applying to workload. Whether anybody, whether you're in finance team or HR team, is going to be applied to you. But if I use the adaptive scope, now I'm scoping it to the department or it's particular SharePoint site that I want to apply it to. So that's what the adaptive scope is used for. Is when you want to apply it to a particular department or a particular persons in a particular department. That's when you use the adaptive scope. But here we're going to use the static, which covers for the whole organization. And here we have the exchange mailbox. Like I said earlier, retention policy covers many many workloads. Here we have Teams chat. You can create retention policy to retain chats. For example, if you can apply retention policy to your Teams, that the chat you have with somebody will be retained, it will not be deleted, even when the person deletes it from his own end. And maybe you delete it. If you run an e-discovery on that chat, you're going to find that chat. Because why is it like that? Is because Teams chats are saved in under Exchange. They use Exchange storage as their own storage. So that's why most times, not even sometimes, that's why anytime you get anytime somebody sends you an email, or sorry, sends you a chat on Teams, you see that notification in the email, you see that chat in the email. That email uses your email as the storage. But where you're seeing the chat is inside your Teams, but the storage is Exchange. So that's why you can apply uh retention policy on Teams to retain chat messages. So when you run an e-discovery search on your email for Teams chat, it's going to pull informations that are Teams chat. It's not going to pull information that are emailed, like an email that somebody sent to you. It's not going to pull that information, but emails that has to do with communications that were had in Teams. That's what it's going to pull off when you use the e-discovery to search for those information. So we have Yammer, we have Microsoft Copilot, we have AI apps, we have Exchange public folders, Skype for business, and Microsoft 365 groups. So since we are creating this to cover all workload, we just do next. So like I already showed us how to create the retention, set the retention period and the retention policy, how you want it to be done. Then you can choose delete items automatically, do nothing, retain forever, only delete item when they have reached a certain age. These are the, but I'm not going to create this policy. So these are the settings you can use to create retention policy after you have. So that's how you do that. Then we have label policies. So now what's the difference between label policies and retention policies? Now, retention policies actually, they are, the retention policy allows you to move items in your mailbox, delete them, like do a lot of things, like delete them, move them to different locations, but they are, move them between folders and another email, like nothing is wrong, but it's still being kept. There's a copy of it that is kept behind. So what retention policy does, that it keeps a copy of everything inside your mailbox. That's why it allows you to delete things in your mailbox. It allows you to make changes, move them. But retention label does not allow you to do anything. Let's just say now we created a retention label policy, sorry, to apply on workload. What it means that your users can no longer delete emails from their mailbox. When they try to do something like move emails, delete emails, they will not be able to delete it. It will simply tell them that there is a label policy that is applied to this email. Sorry, you cannot delete this item. So it doesn't really work in background. It just sits there. What that policy does is what this policy does is that it makes the email sit in that original location, which is your mailbox. It does not move, it does not create any copy backend. It's sitting in that original position until the time it was specified to last. If it was created to last for 5 years, those emails is going to sit there for that period of time until that retention period elapses. Then the emails will start deleting. It does not create any copy back end. That's the difference between retention policy and label policy. So label policy acts like a hold. You are placing a hold on somebody's mailbox. That's how organization place hold on your mailbox. For example, yes, that's how we call it in place hold. More like we want this to be in this place in the original mailbox. We're not creating a copy behind. Just sit there and you cannot delete, you cannot move. You are in that location, pending when we don't want you in that, pending when we don't want the document, or if we want you to delete them. So that's what is called hold. That's what we engineers we call it hold. We already know it's a hold. It's not really a policy. We call it in place hold. When we get cases on issues like this where I noticed that a particular user is not able to delete his email. If he deletes it, it will come back. If he deletes it and refreshes his mailbox, he will see the email he just deleted. We just let the person know that is a hold. Then he said he didn't create any hold, that the only thing he created is a policy. So he asked the person, what kind of policy did you create? If the person said he created this, if we come here and we see this policy here, we tell the person what you created is a hold. We just explain to the person what this label policy does. That if he wants his user to be able to delete their email, move, edit content in their mail files and stuff like that, without any policy affecting them, that's when this retention policy comes in. So that's the two difference between the label policy and the retention policy. So we have policy lookup. So policy lookup is this, like example, just like what example I gave, like a user is having an issue and there are many policies that you have created, many label policies that have been created in your organization, and you don't know the particular policy that is applied to that user, that is affecting that user. And you can't come to the policy and be checking one by one, where is this user located inside this policy. What you simply do is come and search for the user here. If you search for the user here, let's see whether there's any, but I think I didn't create any. Do I even have any pension policy? Yeah, let me try and look up. which means there is no actually policy that is applied to me. That's what he's saying. So if there's a policy that I created that was applied to me, it's going to show the policy, it's going to list the policies that are applied to me under this place. So, and if then what you do as an admin or a security engineer that is working on such an issue is when you list the policies that are under this user. So you check the policy that has to do with a hold, which is label policy. Like I explained, there are two policies. Not all policies that can affect a user from deleting email, except for policy that has to do with label policy. What you do is look at the policy. Once you know the name of the policy, you now come to label policy and check whether the policy is label policy or retention policy. If it's label policy, what you do is go and exclude the user from that policy. You exclude the user from the policy if you want the user to be able to make changes to his mailbox or delete items. But if you don't, you can simply tell the person, see, these are organization requirements. You're not allowed to delete emails from your mailbox. If you have issue with storage, you let us know. You let the admin know. They will be the one to now figure out how they want to move forward with it. Some organizations run like that. I've run into an issue where some organizations said no, we cannot, we don't want users to delete any email from their from their mailbox. So some organizations are like that. So that's what the policy lookup is used for. You can you can also do lookup based on site or N365 group, but the easiest one is user. You just go straight to the person that is having the issue and find the policies that is affecting the user. Then you go and find the policy and exclude the person from the policy. Here we have import, which is PST import. More like you import mailbox that are not. Yes, you import emails that you want to apply retention policies on. Like I was saying earlier, there are other uh, components of DLM, but I just mentioned the retention label and the retention policy. So import is also part of them, which is more like you export an email, more, they import it here, then apply the policy you want to apply on them. Then we have priority cleanup, which is still in preview. Preview means that it's still in development. It has not fully been developed, which is more like you use it to dispose data that are not within that does not align with the company requirements. So that's what you use it for. That's why it's called priority cleanup. You use it to clean up the ones that are required, the ones depending on how you want it. That's what the priority cleanup is used for. Then we have the exchange legacy. Like I was saying before this whole retention policy, label policy, the old one was exchange legacy, which was just used for archiving mailbox. So this retention, we call it MRM. So what it means is Microsoft Right Management. So what it does is MRM retention is different from retention label. MRM retention simply archives email, but you have to create an archive for the mailbox before you can make use of this retention policy under exchange. So this is simply used for archiving emails. For example, you can choose, let me see if I'm archiving it. Let me open my mailbox. Let's see. Would I even enable archive? Yes. I think archive should be enabled. So like yes, so this online archive mailbox. Call it is a mailbox, but it's an archive mailbox that stores. Let's say for example, my primary mailbox is 100 gig, and maybe I want to create space in my primary mailbox. So what I simply do is to come here to the MRM policy, create a retention policy to move emails after 365 days. So what it means that after 1 year, emails in my primary emails in this mailbox will move to online mailbox after 1 year. So it depends on how many months you want to create it. So that's different between the retention label and the retention policy. Sorry, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, you can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So you come here, create retention tags. So there are already default tags that have been created by Microsoft. I feel like my network is having an issue. Can we still hear me? I feel like I was disconnected. Okay, there are default tags Microsoft created. There is 1 month delete, there is 1 week delete. So these tags you are seeing, they are all for mailbox. We call it personal tags. So we have 1 month delete, 1 week delete. These are tags that Microsoft has already created. We call it default tags that Microsoft have already created. So let's just say you don't want to delete any email after 1 week or inside your mailbox. You just come here and create, like the one I created, personal 1 year move to archive, which means after creating this, so let me just show you how to create a tag. 6 months move to archive. Screen. What's going on? My space key is not working. So I was trying to type 6 months move to archive, 6 months. So you do next. So here automatically to entire mailbox. What these settings does is it applies to the whole mailbox, which means that all the folders in this mailbox after 6 months, any emails that are in this folder that are more than 6 months will move to online archive. That's what it does for automatically apply to home mailbox. So you can also create to apply to default folders. Here you can see the folders you can apply it to. We have calendar folder, we have draft, we have inbox, we have junk mail, we have notes. So these are folders you can apply this tag on, which means that any email that is not within this folder, this retention tag will not be applied to it. So, but you can also create a personal tag. What you use this tag what you use this tag for is so that when I create this tag right now without applying it and I finish creating it, my user and I publish the tag, users in my organization will simply come here, think view settings, retention policies. So now they will now come to add new retention policy. So they will now see list of all the tags I created and published. They can use to apply to their mailbox. That's what this settings does. This particular setting does. It does not apply to the user. It just gives the user access to decide to what the folder he wants to apply that settings to. But when you click on this one, you yourself as admin is applying that email automatically to the user's mailbox. You're not giving the user the right to apply that retention label by himself. You're the one that is making the decision, not the user. Same thing with this one. Same thing with the first one. The first one is now the entire mailbox they're making that decision for. But when you create this third one, you're giving your users the right to decide on what you're giving your users the right to choose the retention label they want to apply to their folder. So they can simply come here. Let's just say they want to apply retention label on their inbox folder. They will click on the three dots. You see assign policy, then use parent folder policy. So this parent folder policy is the one I created automatically. That's the only thing they are seeing. There's no other policy about public. I did not create any personal tag for them to use to apply on their own. What I have done is to create a retention policy which is automatically applied to the mailbox. We call it parent folder retention policy, which applies automatically to the mailbox. So that's what the difference between the three. And let's say you want to give your user the right to create, or you want to actually create a particular retention label that focuses on one for a particular user. Reason is because the amount of activity or an email a particular user sends out or receives in his mailbox is different from another person. For example, somebody that is in PR department that sends proposals, emails, that sends proposals and work with outside and outdoor vendors, they'll be getting much more email than a user that what he does is just simply send normal basic emails that doesn't have to do with outside vendors. So for that kind of person, you have to have separate retention label for the two persons. So this is where you come to make those kind of create the retention tags and define how you want them to be. So that's how you create those retention. So when you've created this tag, you now come to retention policy. I'm going to use a tag that have already been created. Click on new policy, then give it a name. Let's see, let me put this so I'll remember to delete it. Then click on add tags. All those retention tags that were created, you see them here. Then select the one you want to apply. So we have even personal never moved to archive. Then we have, okay, let's say 1 year move to archive, then I add it. Then next, then submit. So what I will do right now is I'll go to Exchange Admin Center to find the particular user I want to assign this policy to. Then apply it to the person's mailbox. So let's just say I want to apply this policy to, so you go to mailboxes, then to this user, I'll simply click on the user, come to mailbox. But before then, I need to make sure that I've enabled archive. So you see, archive is not enabled for this user. So I cannot apply the policy to the user. But also, yes, I can actually apply the policy to the user. So sometimes you have an issue where maybe someone comes to you like, oh, I applied a retention policy to move my emails to archive, but it's not moving. Sometimes you need to come and check if actually the person's archive mailbox has been enabled. But sometimes you can also apply this policy, yes, pending when you enable the archive mailbox, so that when you apply, okay, there's when you apply the policy, so default MRM policy is the one that, like the one I said that Microsoft already has created for organizations. So once you enable mailbox, the person's archive mailbox, the default MRM policy kicks in. So I can choose to change it to this the one that says test. See the one we just created now. It has appeared here because I've published it. then save. What it means now is that anytime this user enables his archive mailbox, any email that is 6 months or 1 year, depending on the tag. Yes, I think it's 1 year personal tag. That is older than 1 year will start moving to archive mailbox immediately. So that's what this archive, this MRM policy is used for. So this is what this MRM policy is used for. So we also have journal rules. So it's just used for recording, to record all communications in your organization's email retention, more like the archive policy, which is under the same exchange. All these ones under exchange legacy has to do with your mailbox. It doesn't affect your files and documents that are stored in your SharePoint or OneDrive. It's just centered on your mailbox. So we have classifiers, trainable classifiers, just like what I said. They can create retention policy based on trainable classifiers, sensitive info types, and all that. So that's basically for data lifecycle management. So I don't know if we have any question or whether any question what we have covered or more. Do we? Any question or do we understood what I just did? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Guys, if you have questions, the floor is open for questions. If you have questions, is everything clear so far?
All right. Since we don't have any question, that will be the end for the section. So that's basically what data lifecycle is all about. You use it to manage your documents that are stored in your organization from the time it was created and the time is no longer needed. If you want to continue to keep them, or if you want to delete the ones that are no longer of value, whether it's business value or legal value, anyone. So that's what you use this data lifecycle management for. So that's basically how data lifecycle management works in Power View. Thank you everyone for your time. And since we don't have any question, we'll be ending this section here. Do have a wonderful.
Thank you. Let me ask a question on behalf of them. If
Okay.
the user is a global admin or tenant, obviously the user can access the compliance portal. So the user need additional rules, permission to be able to perform activities on the data lifecycle management.
If the user has compliance administrator rule, yes, the user can do that. And
So
even without the person, being a global administrator, once the person have a compliance administrator rule, the person can perform these activities as long as the person have the license on the person can be able to make changes and create policies.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So everyone, thank you so much for joining. If you have additional questions, you can connect with our speaker on LinkedIn, ask her questions, and the recording of the session will be hosted on my YouTube channel. I've just shared the link. If you're not following the channel, you can subscribe to the channel. If you feel like subscribing to the channel, the recording will be hosted there for all past events that we've had on Security Compliance Corner. The recording is also posted on that particular YouTube channel, and any other feature recordings that will be having for this class also will also be hosted on that particular YouTube channel. And if you have further questions, feel free to connect to us. Thank you so much for joining the session. You're going to see us in the next session. The next session promises to be powerful. We're looking at two. Either we talk about the data governance or the compliance manager itself to see how everything that's presented together as discussed further in those sessions. We have a lot of amazing sessions till the end of the year. So please do join us for our future sessions. Thank you so much. And I'll say bye-bye for now.